Hello everyone, hi. So yes, I am Jack. I'm the founding research scientist here at Agimo. So I've kind of led our efforts on everything from model post-training, fine-tuning, preference tuning, etc. All our reasoning research that we did last year on the ARC challenge. And most recently, I've been spending a lot of time working on agent design, context engineering type stuff for CodeWords. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. It'll be a very quick talk. It's not a novel result or groundbreaking finding, but more kind of a periodic reminder style talk to when designing an agent, design for a human. And that's a kind of a slightly jarring statement, particularly from a research point of view. I think kind of anthropomorphizing LLMs is highly unhelpful and is a kind of a bad habit to fall into. But it just turns out that when you're designing agents, it's actually kind of the single most useful and valuable peace of mind or kind of frame of mind to be in when trying to build these systems that go off and do things for you. To basically think, how would a human do this? So I'm going to there'll be three kind of main points or takeaways that I want you to come away with this. One, just start basic. When you're designing an agent, don't try and skip to the most sophisticated thing. Build up complexity incrementally, and at every point, apply what we call the intern test. Then I'm going to give you a couple of pretty obvious tips on designing good tools for your agent. And finally, I'm going to encourage you all to actually build user interfaces that correspond with what the tools do for the agent, so that a human can use the tool that the agent uses as well. So, point one, start with the basics. The biggest mistake you can make when designing agents is to kind of, read some idiot's guide to building the most complicated and sophisticated agent. Someone writes a blog post, it will invariably be like, some kind of agent that has sub-agents that all go off and do things, and they kind of dynamically spin up sub-agents on the fly, and it'll be just absolute bonkers. I'm kind of convinced that these people write these articles as clickbait, or else they're paid by OpenAI and Anthropic to try and get people to burn as many tokens as possible. So stop right there. Step one, do the simplest thing first. So literally step one, chuck everything in the system prompt. You're trying to get your LLM to do something, put all the information you think it would need in the system prompt and go from there. As you get it to do new things and you realize, I need to give it this information, I need to give it this, it'll start expanding, but crucially you'll kind of realize the failure points and you'll realize what tools you need to give it to do it more effectively. And so every time you do this kind of increase in complexity, you kind of put yourself in the shoes of an intern. You say, would a human intern have the necessary and sufficient information to do this task, to build this thing I'm asking it to build? And I should probably have the word minimal, necessary, and sufficient in there as well. Like, am I giving it the sufficient information, but I'm also giving it a load of relevant information? And when you start thinking like this, you quickly realize, okay, for this kind of queries, I have this information, but I also have all this information, so I need a way that I can, only put in the right information at the right time. And you'll start thinking about, can I do this automatically? Kind of more traditional RAG type things. Can we detect what type of request it is, and can we put in the context based on that? But as you get more and more features to your agent, even that will become quite difficult. And we, in a way, have realized that we basically need to give the agent the ability to kind of retrieve the context it needs to do a task on demand. And so I've got the word overzealous in there. When you're thinking about this intern, you need to think of it as like the keenest intern in the world, because a side effect of training these LLMs to do tasks for you is you have to teach them all the information that's ever been written down in the world. And so they're incredibly overconfident. And so no matter if you give them no context, you can ask it to do a task and you want it to do it in a specific way, but you could give it catastrophically insufficient context and the LLM is still going to say, yep, got it, consider it done, say no more, I'm on it. It will just overconfidently go off and then it'll come back and do the exact opposite of what you wanted it to do. So that's the frame of mind you want to be in. So for us, as we built up, we started with our system prompt. We ended up having this really long document of kind of best practices. Okay, a CodeWords function, as you saw, the code there, it's a fast API application. It needs to be written in a specific way. It needs to do logging in a certain way. It needs to make the response and request and response models in the right way. There's all these rules that it needs to adhere to. And so we start writing them down and it gets longer and longer and longer. Then we say, okay, people can ask it to build things with integrations. But as is clear now, if someone asks for something that doesn't need an integration, there's no point in throwing in thousands and thousands of tokens about integrations. So what we end up doing is kind of splitting up our documentation into separate documents. And so first step, what I did was essentially write lots of markdown documents, like you're writing documentation for a human. And then we can make use of, so here's kind of an old version of our docs. You can make use of GitHub's automatic kind of rendering of markdown. So now we have something that a human can navigate through. So this is the information that the agent's going to get, but it's also easy for us to read and to say, okay, if I was doing this task, which document would I read? Okay, the agent is trying to do something that involves calling other CodeWords services. It would read this document, and I can immediately spot mistakes. And this is so much easier than if we're just writing loads and loads of raw, markdown. And so that's a kind of a very easy first step for us. We just decided, okay, let's and we've got you can make use of relative links here. And so we have a set of documents and we can very easily build a tool that lets our agent go and kind of consult this documentation. And then that brings me to the next slide, which is designing such a tool. So just a couple of tips on good practices for tool design. You want to make sure that you're writing clear tool names, tool descriptions, type annotations, and always think about, the agent can't see the source code of the tool that it's using. It just sees a kind of a schema, and so check out that schema. So here's an example. What you might build something, make that a little bit bigger. So you've got a consult docs tool, take some paths, you've got a little doc string, and so then that will get generated into a tool that gets automatically stuck into the agent. But you can actually kind of do one better than this, because here we're not giving any type hint. We're saying blah, 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 use this tool in this way. We're telling it to start with the README. We're telling it to, read this first so that it knows what to read next. But then it's kind of inefficient for it to have to do that every time. So maybe we should just include all that information in the tool description. And when you're in this process, you're trying to think of ways to make it better. And so, for instance, here we can make use of it. We can give it a type annotation. It takes a list of strings, but in fact we can actually give it an annotated type description, so we can describe what that parameter is. We can give examples of that parameter. And then here, I've chucked in the README as the actual description. And then once you've done this, what people never seem to do is actually look at what is it that the agent sees. It doesn't see this. It sees this kind of JSON schema that gets generated. So you should call the list tools endpoint of your MCP if you're building an MCP. So I think I've got it running. What did I do? So you can literally curl it, and then so here, this is the description it gets, how to use it, blah, 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 and here's the input schema. And if I hadn't added those type annotations, it would have an input schema here, but it would just say blank. And so the model doesn't know what is it I'm meant to be providing. You maybe have given it in the description, but you want to minimize how many, you don't want to put it in the description and in the type annotation. So these are the kind of just try and be smart when you're designing these tools. Make use of how the LLM is going to see it. Then, finally, dry, don't repeat yourself. That was what I was just saying. So don't there's no point doing a big NumPy style docstring where it says these are all the parameters and also telling it what the parameters are in the schema. Finally, build UIs. This is a kind of a non-obvious thing that you should do, which I found extremely useful. Again, as a way to put yourself in the shoes of the LLM. You want to reduce and minimize the friction that there is for humans to use these tools. You don't want to just write the tool as code, give it to the LLM, and then it's kind of, set and forget, because it's difficult for you to actually test it and use it. So I've got another little example here. So you've got, and there's not really any excuse not to do this. You've got so many frameworks that make it really easy. You've got things like Gradio, Streamlit, etc. My personal favorite is this thing called Fast HTML, which allows you to generate UIs using just Python. Where was it? Here. So, for example, here I've got, I just want to do the first one. This is a little website for generating the documentation, kind of like what we saw in GitHub. It's, 49 lines of code. And if I run that, we have a nice little documentation website. And so now we can navigate through this. It makes it so much easier for us to diagnose and spot where the agent's going wrong. We can look at, say we notice, and this is actually something I noticed today, maybe the model isn't using, if you're asking it to build me a function that summarizes something and you find it's not using GPT-5, it's using some other model, and then you can go, oh, okay, why is it here? Yeah, we tell it about GPT-5, but then, here's a model selection guide. And in the model selection guide, we haven't actually mentioned GPT-5. This is so much easier for me to do now that I've got this nice little interface. Obviously, this is essentially the exact same as the interface I showed you with GitHub, but the benefit of this, as I'll show you now, is, just stay on this. So as your documentation grows and the amount of information that your agent is needing to retrieve, you'll start to realize, okay, actually giving it this huge document just to first of all figure out where it needs to read, and then there's subsections and subsections. Maybe that's not the best way to do this. For example, we have a load of templates that we offer to the agent. It can read about each of the templates, and then it can go and actually view the templates. But as we add more and more templates, this document gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so there's no point shoving thousands of lines of context into the LLM when, as a human, you wouldn't scroll through that and be like, okay, I want to learn about a template that uses LinkedIn, say. You would search. And so when you've got something like this, it's very easy to add on search functionality. So here I've got the next version of this, a version with search. So here I just do some, I chunk the documentation, I index it, and I add some search functionality, bit of styling for the search bar, etc. We're still only on, 174 lines of code, but with search. Ooh. Now suddenly we've got functionality, and I can share this with colleagues, and everyone else can use this as their source of truth for our documentation. I can now go, okay, let me learn about something that uses LinkedIn. And immediately these are the, okay, there's a deep research pattern. Okay, LinkedIn. Here I've got a template that uses LinkedIn, another template that uses LinkedIn. And so this is what the agent sees. And so you want to make it easy for a human to see that same thing. By just providing a chunk, a few lines of the chunk, is that sufficient? Will the agent look at the right thing? You need to, as I said, minimize the friction involved in testing out these tools. Here I implemented this using BM25. maybe I want to test doing it more semantically using embeddings. I've built this search function. I can literally import this in my MCP and make it into a tool. And like, you want to keep that kind of that one-to-one relationship between the tools that you're using and the tools that the MCP is using. And yeah, think like the M, be the LLM. So yeah, that's the last of it. How do I go to the... Yeah, to summarize, start with the basics. You know, you want to, as I said, kind of like a just-in-time complexity. Only add complexity when you think you need it, because at the point that you think you need it will be when you realize why you need it and how you need to solve it. Do this kind of intern test. Think about like, how would I solve this? If this was the only context I had, would I know how to solve this problem? Tool design, you know, make use of that JSON schema, look at it. Look, when you're doing your type annotations, etc., check how it looks to the LLM. And finally, yeah, build UIs. It's really not as scary. You don't need to get your front-end dev involved. You know, it doesn't need to win any design awards. If it is looking slick, it probably means I've wasted too much time on it. The simplest thing to kind of let you be the agent. Thank you.